Sunday dinner began as usual. My children, Nora and Oliver, sat beside me at the long mahogany table in my parents' house. The same table that 3 generations had gathered around for decades. The dining room was filled with the extended family as always. 14 people huddled around the table, which was covered with a white tablecloth and arranged in formal table settings. My aunts and uncles sat in the chairs closest to my parents. My cousins were arranged according to their age and social standing. My sister, Lauren, sat directly opposite me, her finely manicured fingernails tapping on her wine glass, a habit she acquired whenever she felt superior. The crystal chandelier cast a warm light, illuminating the fine china that my mother insisted on using, even for family dinners. Everything had to reflect success, even when that success was built on carefully guarded secrets and appearances. Nora, my 7-year-old daughter, dropped her fork while trying to reach for her glass of water. The fork hit the ceramic plate, the sound sharp during a moment of quiet conversation. A minor incident, barely noticeable amidst the usual dinner chatter. But suddenly my mother's head turned towards us like a predator spotting its prey, her eyes narrowing with that familiar look of displeasure I knew so well. "Can't you control them?" I asked, my voice cutting through the dinner conversation. I picked up the fork and handed it back to Nora. "It was an accident," Lauren added, rolling her eyes. "Everything with your kids is an accident. Last week they were running down the corridor. The week before that they were laughing too loudly during the Mother's Book Club." Uncle George laughed from across the table. "Children will always be children, but everything has its limits." My father remained silent, hunched over cutting the roast beef. I noticed his jaw clench, but he didn't say a word. "I've been patient, but my generosity has its limits," Mother continued, carefully placing the cutlery. "You've been living here for 3 years rent-free." The words echoed around the room. Several relatives exchanged glances. "I think it's time to discuss your contribution to this house," she said. £2,000 a month is a reasonable amount. Or perhaps you'd prefer to find your own place." Aunt Susan nodded in agreement. "That's very fair, Helen. Very fair." Lorena smiled. "Perhaps it teaches them responsibility. Some of us didn't need to move back to the family home in our 30s. I took a deep breath as I watched my children. Oliver, only 5, had stopped eating altogether. He looked at me with worried eyes. Nora's little hand grasped mine under the table. My mother added, "The children are a real pain anyway, they ruin my peace. Push or leave." Everyone around the table nodded. Uncle George, Aunt Susan, Lauren, and even my cousin Mark, who rarely spoke, were there. There was a family consensus that I had overstayed my welcome, that I was a burden, and that my children were a nuisance. My father's knuckles were white from gripping the knife and fork, but he didn't say a word. I reached for my phone and opened the bank app. The relatives continued to grumble, already discussing how much rent I should pay, whether $2,000 was enough, and whether I could even afford it. "This is an interesting time to find out who's paying your mortgage," I said quietly. The conversation stopped. My mother's confident smile appeared for a moment, then vanished completely. "What did you say?" she asked. My father's voice was barely audible. "Don't." But I was tired of the silence, tired of being treated like a charity case in front of my children, tired of seeing them learn that family meant humiliation and conditional love. I turned my phone screen toward my mother. I said, "It's an interesting time to discuss the rent, considering I've been paying your mortgage for 4 years. There was silence. Lorena leaned forward. "This is ridiculous. Why are you doing this?" "Because Dad told me to," I interrupted, looking at him. His face was pale, and he set down the cutlery with trembling hands. 4 years ago, in October, when the company went bankrupt, when all the business clients pulled out that same month, when I remortgaged the house to cover outstanding debts and salaries, trying to keep everyone's jobs until the very end, when I was 3 months away from foreclosure, and the bank was sending out final notices. I still remember that phone call. Dad's voice trembling as he explained the situation. How everything he had built over 30 years had crumbled in less than 6 months. How Mom hadn't fully grasped the magnitude of the financial disaster. How he needed help but couldn't ask anyone else in the family for it. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the glass of water, and she almost dropped it. We never told anyone. I flipped through my bank statements. $12,400 a month for 48 months. That's $595,200 I paid to keep this roof over your heads. Aunt Susan opened her mouth and closed it silently. Lauren said, "You're lying," but her voice lacked conviction. I stood up, walked around the table, and placed my phone in front of my mother. Transaction after transaction, all with the same address. Mortgage payment, 123, Burwood Street. Her address. Uncle George tightened his grip on his throat. "Helen, is this true?" Mother seemed speechless. She stared at the screen, slowly scrolling through the endless list of payments. "We were going to tell everyone," my father said finally in a hoarse voice. As soon as the business recovered," I said, For years have passed. The business hasn't picked up. I sold it 2 years ago. I know that because you called me crying, Dad. And I told you not to worry about the mortgage payments, that I would take care of it. Lorena's face was devoid of all pride, replaced by growing horror as she grasped the implications. But how could you afford it? You said you were struggling financially. You said that was why you went back to your parents' house. You made me believe you needed help, that you could barely make ends meet. I came back here because Dad asked me to, I explained, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling around me. 3 years ago, right after Mom's surgery, the complications, and the long recovery. He thought she needed the family around her during those difficult months. He thought the children would lift her spirits, give her something positive to focus on while she recovered. I had a lovely apartment across town, 2 bedrooms close to the children's school, in a neighborhood where they had friends. We were happy there. The memory of that apartment now seemed distant, like a life lived in another world. A place where my children could be noisy, messy, and joyful without constantly being reminded that they were a nuisance. I returned to my seat and put my arm around Oliver, who began to cry quietly. Nora squeezed my hand even tighter. I gave up my apartment and moved my children to a home where they would be criticized for every sound they made and for every moment of their childhood joy, because my family needed me. Finally, the mother managed to speak. We didn't know that we thought your father's consulting work covered the mortgage payments. My consulting work barely covers the grocery bill, Dad admitted quietly. Hardly. The mortgage, property taxes, insurance. That's all she has to bear, and she has for years. Cousin Mark moved away from the table, saying, I need some air. Sit down, Aunt Susan said sharply to him, then turned to me. Why didn't you say anything? Why did you let us think you were taking advantage of us? I simply said, because my father asked me not to. Because he was embarrassed by the collapse of the family business his father had established 60 years earlier, during his lifetime. Because he didn't want people to know how bad things were, how close you were to losing this house, the symbol of the family's success and stability. Because he believed the family should help each other quietly, without making a big deal out of it, and without seeking recognition or thanks. The contradiction was clear to me. I remained silent to protect his pride, and in doing so, I allowed my children and me to become targets of the family's judgment and criticism. I looked around at each face at the table, studying their expressions. All pride had vanished, replaced by a mixture of shock, shame, embarrassment, and in some cases, growing anger at having been kept from them. Uncle George looked betrayed. Aunt Susan seemed unable to process the information. And Cousin Mark had his head in his hands. I continued. But I'm tired of staying silent when my children are humiliated in the home I pay for. I'm tired of being treated like a burden when I'm the only reason we have a family home to live in. Lauren's wine glass was forgotten. All those times I commented on your lack of contribution. Mom, did you know? I thought we had the situation under control. The mother's voice was now trembling. Your father said he had the situation under control. I said, looking at my father across the table. He was in control of the situation. Because he asked me for help, I gave it to him. Without any questions, without any conditions, without any demand for thanks or appreciation. Just help, quiet and steady, because that's what I believe about the role of family. That's what I was raised on. My father's eyes were filled with tears now. Tears he was so proud of that he wouldn't let them fall in front of everyone. Uncle George stood up suddenly, and the sound of his chair scraping against the wooden floor was heard. This is quite surprising, Helen. William, I think it's best if we leave you two alone to sort this out. No, the mother said sharply, her voice trembling slightly. They all stayed. They all heard me humiliating my daughter at this very table. They all nodded in agreement when I demanded she pay the rent or leave. They can all sit here and hear the truth about who was really supporting this family. She turned to me, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw genuine emotion in her eyes. Not the cold disappointment I was used to, but something warmer, perhaps. Or remorse. I didn't know, she said. I swear I didn't know. I asked her. Would that have changed anything? If you had known I was paying mortgage installments, would you have treated my children differently? Would you have treated me differently? She couldn't answer. My father tightened his throat and said, I should have told her. I should have told everyone. But I was ashamed. The business my father had built, which I had destroyed, the home that was almost lost, and I had to ask my daughter for help to save us. I couldn't face it. I said, then instead let me face it. Let my children and I be a family charity case, while I quietly maintain everyone's housing. Aunt Susan put down her handkerchief and said, Helen, I think I owe your daughter an apology. We all do. Apologizing doesn't change anything in the bank account, Lauren muttered, then added, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My phone rang. A text message from the bank. The automatic monthly payment had been processed. $12,400, withdrawn exactly on time. I showed the notice to my mother. This is your mortgage payment for this month. Due on the 15th, Paid on the 10th, as usual. Just like the last 48 months. She closed her eyes. I'm so sorry, she asked. Are you sorry? Are you sorry that I paid the mortgage installments? Or are you sorry that everyone found out? Both, she admitted. And I'm sorry I made you feel unwelcome in a home you're trying to protect from seizure. I'm sorry I criticized your beautiful children who did nothing wrong except be children. I'm sorry I was so oblivious. Oliver shed on my sleeve. Can we go now, Mum? I looked at my son's tear-stained face, at Nora's bewildered expression, and at the table full of relatives who suddenly saw me in a completely different light. I said, Yes, my love, we can go. I got up and helped my children get up from their chairs. No one around the table moved to stop us. My father said, Wait, please, let's talk about this. I agreed, saying, We can talk tomorrow, when the children aren't here to watch their family fall apart. My mother reached out her hand as I passed by her chair. I took her hand in mine. You were cruel. Unforgivably cruel. Please don't take the children from me. You told me to pay the rent or leave, she reminded her gently. So I will leave. I will continue to pay the mortgage because I promised Dad I would, and I keep my promises, but my children and I will find a place where they can laugh without criticism, a place where they can put a fork in without judgment. Lauren stood up. I'll help you pack your things. It's the least I can do. I said, There's no need for that. I've been looking for apartments for 2 months, ever since Nora was last reprimanded for singing. I have a place ready. We can move in next weekend. Uncle George interjected, saying, If you need help moving, I have a truck. I said, Thank you. I'll tell you later. Then I directed my children toward the door. Behind us, the dinner table was in complete disarray. The food was getting cold, the wine was untouched, and a family was confronting realities they had successfully ignored for years. At the entrance, I stopped and turned around. In any case, I never sought recognition, I never sought gratitude. All I wanted was for my children to feel welcome in their grandparents' home. That's all I ever wanted. The mother was now crying silently. Her perfect composure had finally crumbled. We left them there, my children and I, and went out to my car into the fresh evening air. Nora got into her child's seat, and Oliver got into his. I fastened their seatbelts and kissed them on the forehead. Oliver asked, Are we in trouble? No, my love, I reassured him. We're not in trouble. We'll be fine. And for the first time in 3 years, I believed it. My phone rang before I could start the car. It was my dad's number. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then my mom's. Then voicemail again. Then Lauren's. I muted the phone and drove home through the quiet streets. My children began to relax in the back seat, their earlier tension dissipating. The mortgage payment is due tomorrow. The family home will remain secure for another month. And my children will learn that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is distance yourself from people who don't value you, even if they are family. Especially if they are family. Because a real family doesn't demand rent from those who shelter them. A real family doesn't criticize children for being children. A real family doesn't mistake silence for weakness, or humility for surrender. And my children deserve to learn what a real family is.
सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा, मगर खामोश है दुनिया, कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा। बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत, मुझे है आज भी तेरी वफा की सख्त जरूरत। साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर, साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर, दर्द